Thank you so much, Margaret. It's such a pleasure to be here as you embark on this exciting journey to create this major new centre in this building beside us. Such a historic location. And what Margaret asked me to do was to talk a little bit about the journey of creating the Science Gallery, which opened its doors on Pier Street 10 years ago, in 2000, oh, sorry, 8 years ago, in 2008, 10 years before you opened in 2018. And to talk a little bit about what we were trying to do, what the vision was, and what the experience was in creating this space where art and science collide. You probably can't see it, but the Science Gallery is in the Naughton Institute. Tellingly, the whole journey of the Science Gallery was enabled by a visionary gift from the Nauchtons, from Martin and Carmel Naughton, which allowed Trinity to try something very different. And it allowed the creation of this new building, which was to house a new research institute focused on nanoscience and a new way to engage the public with science. And you see the Science Gallery here. But I'm going to start by reflecting on the question of, so where do creative ideas come from? There are a number of ways of looking at this question. There are neuroscientists, for example, who put people into fMRI scanners, and while their brains are being scanned, they actually force them to improvise on very small keyboards so that they can see what happens in their brains when they're being creative. But another way to look at the question of where creative ideas come from is to look at them in a social context. So what are the spaces that allow people from different disciplines and different backgrounds to come together, to share ideas, to share perspectives, and for new ideas to emerge? And there's a huge amount of literature on creativity that demonstrates that creative ideas happen, whether it's in the Copenhagen that saw the emergence of quantum mechanics, or the Weimar of the Bauhaus movement. When you create an environment where people from very different backgrounds can come together and can share ideas and can experiment. And I find this is a beautiful way of encapsulating this idea. It's from the cellist Yo-Yo Ma. And Yo-Yo Ma talks about, he says, let me take my favorite example of creativity from science. In ecology, where two ecosystems meet, such as the forest and the savanna, the point of intersection is the site of edge effect. In that transition zone, because of the influence the two ecological communities have on one another, you find the greatest diversity of life, as well as the greatest number of new life forms. So, in ecology, as in technology, new ideas occur at the boundaries, at the edge. And I think it's no coincidence that Science Gallery is at the edge of the university. It's connecting the university and the city. And I think it's also very interesting that your project is also very much a project linking the university with the public in a new way, around a different theme, around Joyce and literature. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. Okay, I'm going to give up on this now. Of course, intersectional creativity was something that was very familiar to Joyce. Joyce was an entrepreneur as well as a writer who brought together the latest technology with the arts in his cinematograph Volta on Mary Street on the site of where we now have Pennies. He brought the idea of cinema as he'd experienced it in Trieste and created Ireland's very first cinema, the very first place to experience this new technology. Didn't do very well financially, showing kind of arty French and Italian films wasn't necessarily very popular in Mary Street. But this was an example of intersectional entrepreneurship in its essence. So where did the Science Gallery come from? Well, originally there was a group of scientists, nanoscientists, working at the most minute level of pushing around individual atoms, who wanted to create a new research centre and believed also that there was a need to engage the public in a different way with science. One of them was Mike Coey, who you see here, who is a Trinity professor of physics. And initially, I think it's fair to say that there wasn't a very clear idea of what this would be. There was an idea that it had to engage with current research, but it was really, when I came on board a year before it opened, it was not quite a blank canvas, but there was a real opportunity to shape this vision. Like all projects, it came with a number of constraints. We had a small space and a small and rather pointy building, which meant that we couldn't dream of turning this into something like W5 in Belfast, or one of these large science centres, and that we needed instead to think of a different model. We couldn't be that have that large permanent collection of exhibits. We didn't have an existing collection. And then the lack of a collection meant that we needed to be fast. We needed to be a place that changed very quickly, a fast pace of change. And actually being small helped with that, because being small meant that we could be more nimble, so we could develop a model which is in constant flux and constant change. There was also a vision that this should not just be for kids. I mean, there's a very common thing around the world in science attractions that, there's this weird idea that science is for kids and art is for adults. And why is that? I can't see any reason why science should be purely for kids. And the way science is presented as fun, and you've all seen those images of, touch the thing and your hair goes on end. And it's very much designed for this idea of sort of the under 10s or under 12s. And a serious consequence of that is that people lose interest in science once they hit their teenage years, and because it's in a way infantilized in the way it's presented to the public, which is weird given the highly challenging nature of contemporary scientific research and its significant implications for all aspects of our lives, that there's this disengagement. So for us it was important that we would reach those young adults and adults with our project. And then we had the constraint of money. Initially, we had very little government funding. Subsequently, the government came on board and gave us some capital funding, which was wonderful, and a little bit of operating funding down the line. But initially, it forced us to be entrepreneurial. It forced us to go out and create partnerships, create connections. It forced us to go and engage with technology companies like Google, who came on board very early on and really were tremendously helpful, not just in terms of funding them, but in terms of their engagement with the gallery. So in putting flesh on the bones of the original idea, we wanted to make it that place which is not just about telling people about science, but actually colliding science and art. A little bit like the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, where you're smashing together people from different disciplines to see what happens when you bring them together. We decided to approach that through themes, through big themes. So our very first project was on light, and it was involving everyone from an astrophysicist creating 3D magnetic imaging of the sun, to Willie Williams, U2's lighting designer, and to many artists, scientists, and creatives who were working with light in new ways, and including these bubbleheads who are roving around the streets of Dublin. What's most important is what happens inside the walls of the gallery, which is, and it's a bit dark, unfortunately, the image, but if you can imagine, there are three people here, and they're in conversation. In between them is an artwork involving living human cells, taken from a girl who died in 1968. So this is a living cell line, and they're involved in a conversation. She is a student, actually a student mediator from Trinity, who's been trained by our team in communicating around these themes around science and art. And there are all sorts of conversations that can happen around such a thing. Is this alive? How do we feel about the fact that you can buy a living human cell line like this from the internet? Who owns these cells? Whose body is this? Is this an extension of the person's body? What are the ethics around that? These are triggers for conversations, rather than the idea of transmitting messages to the visitors. It's all about stimulating and sparking conversation. In terms of who we are for in the Science Gallery, as I mentioned, we've decided to really focus on these young adults as this core audience who are traditionally left behind by science-related attractions. And they are a very difficult audience to engage. They're very savvy, they are very averse to messages being broadcast at them. So in a way, that conversational approach was key. And we thought, let's have them having conversations with their peers, let's have the students engaging with them and drawing them into conversation as a way to approach them so that they're actually contributing to the dialogue rather than receiving a message. Very early on, we decided that there were 3 key ingredients that should be part of everything we did at Science Gallery. And this was something that we felt should be really core to the experience. And there are 3 simple things, but they're actually very hard to deliver consistently. So the first one was connection. The idea that every experience in Science Gallery should allow you to have a new type of social connection. That it's not so much about what you might see, but about who you might meet. And this could be that you're getting to work with a researcher in immunology on a workshop where you're extracting your own DNA or participating in a research experiment. It could be an artist. It could be the conversation with a student. But that social connection had to be core. The second critical thing was this idea of participate. Which is not the same as interactive or interact. Interactivity for me is a little bit old. It's a bit like those automated menus and telephones and so on. But participation is where you're actually contributing to the experience. You're giving something, you're being involved, and it can be very low tech sometimes. It might be, for example, a wall where visitors have contributed their first memory just on pieces of card, but everybody is fascinated to see what everybody's first memory is. And it's actually part of a real scientific experiment and a research experiment, but there's nobody else but you who has access to that knowledge, so you're giving something meaningful. The third one is the most difficult one, particularly to sustain over time, but it's the most important one, surprise. How can you surprise people? How can you capture their imagination? It need not be the big wow surprise, but even the surprise of figuring out that you can do something that you didn't believe you could, making a neon sculpture or whatever it might be. And the problem with surprise is that as an institution matures, it stagnates often. So how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep flows of ideas of people coming into the institution, new people coming, connecting? And one of the reasons that I'm moving on is actually, I think it's important to there need to be fresh ideas coming in. And it's actually to Munich rather than Berlin. Berlin is very cool, but then so the whole gallery is made possible by this community, this creative community that surrounds the gallery, that feeds into the gallery, that engages with it, and that uses it as a platform for interactions. So these range from researchers and students to artists to designers to architects to engineers to entrepreneurs. And the former provost, John Hegarty of Trinity College, described the gallery as part of a new manifestation of the role of the university for the 21st century. So Trinity, as everyone, all the UCD people here know, was very famous for its railings. Trinity was this sort of enclosed oasis within the city centre. But I think the gallery was one step, and there are now many more things happening, but it was towards opening up that, being this membrane between the university and the city, drawing the researchers out, but also drawing the public in, drawing the young adults in, and having a new face to the university, rather than the feeling of, am I allowed to go in there, which is so frequently the case. So here are a couple of examples of projects that we've done in the Science Gallery. This was one which it started from a conversation between an immunologist and somebody who was doing viral marketing. And could we do an exhibition on, initially the immunologist said, let's do an exhibition about plague. And we said, it's kind of a nice idea, but maybe a little bit on the negative side. So what about, and it's sort of those Monty Python images of, bring out your dead. So we said, what about opening it up to the idea of infectious? And let's not just look at epidemics, but let's look at viral marketing, let's look at yawning, jokes, laughter, financial panic. And we actually even had Patrick Honohan involved. Before he became governor of the central bank for his expertise on bank runs. So looking at financial panic, and this was a moment of financial panic. But it was also, funnily enough, or not funnily enough, but it was the moment of swine flu. So we opened the exhibition 4 days before the swine flu epidemic happened, and that was a really interesting moment. First of all, people complained or called the Dublin City Council, and they said, "Oh, it's terrible. Trinity's been hit by the swine flu." But then we had an opportunity to actually bring together people while the information was still unfolding. What's going on? We got influenza experts. We got Kingston Mills, and we had all sorts of people. And we became the one key focus for the debate about the swine flu, and that was the ability to respond in real time to these kind of events was very important to us. And then, we also had the founder of BuzzFeed involved in this project, Jonah Peretti, as a curator, so he did viral media experiments and so on as part of this. So this kind of expansive theme was very useful to us. One of the more playful exhibits in Infectious was this one. It's called Kiss Culture. So every visitor who came in, they could kiss a Petri dish containing horse blood agar, which we generally told them afterwards. But then they would come in 2 days, they could come back to the gallery and they could see their kiss incubated. They could see what kind of wonderful flora they were sharing every time they kiss. And the scientists were excited about it because they said, this is great because this way people will understand that it's actually safer to kiss than to shake hands. And that's true for some of these characters, but possibly not for others. In which case, probably better not kissing. People with beards are the worst. But this led to a whole series of experiments in the gallery. We tagged everybody with RFID tags. They were able to infect each other electronically as they went through the gallery, and that was contributing to a real research experiment, which led to a public. The people who developed the research then took the same technology and applied it in children's hospitals in Italy to look at infection pathways in children's hospitals. So that for us, it's often about finding that sweet spot where it's an exciting experience for the public, but it's also something that's rewarding for the scientists who get involved, the artists, the designers, that they're actually in some way developing their project further through that engagement. I met my current wife at the opening of this particular project, Love Lab, and this was on the science of desire and attraction. Everybody said it was a Machiavellian scheme that I had created. And it was a project which was real research about the nature of attraction and desire, where we hooked people up and we did speed dating events. But then it led to real scientific output. So this is one of the top journals in the world, the Journal of Neuroscience. And this is a research experiment on the outcome of romantic interactions predicted using EEG, which was carried out in the Science Gallery. So again, that's been very important to us for getting the community of scientists around the gallery to keep contributing. I won't go into this in detail, but this is, in a way, we see the Science Gallery as not something that's about pushing out messages, but a giant kind of vacuum cleaner for ideas, hoovering in ideas from all these different sources, from researchers, from artists, from scientists, from students, and then drawing them into the public. So sometimes people talk about incubators for technology companies in the startup phase. We think of Science Gallery more like a ventilator. It's taking ideas and ventilating them in public, getting the public feedback on them. That's an important role of it. And then some of the projects go on after they engage with the public to have an afterlife, whether it's research publications, as prototype products, or as commissioned artworks. in this kind of idea of this kind of giant vacuum cleaner, we are often looking at what we can get from our visitors. So harvesting things from our visitors. Over the years, we have taken DNA from our visitors, we've taken sweat, we've taken blood. That was really complicated and involved multiple faintings and a phlebotomist. We've extracted all sorts of things from our visitors. This was a very simple example where we did a project on the elements and artists and scientists exploring the chemical elements, and we had a giant empty periodic table, which was a bit of a risk. You know, we opened the exhibition, there was this huge periodic table of the elements, which was completely empty. And basically the idea was that visitors would bring in elements. We were a bit nervous about some like polonium and plutonium and so on. But the beautiful thing was this filled up over the exhibition. So this is calcium. I mean, you can't really see it that well, but there was ostrich egg, there was sort of people who brought in calcium supplements and all sorts of things. In Ireland, we had people who came in with horseshoes, and gradually over 3 months this filled up, which was quite lovely. And you know, then you get people coming back, bringing what they have, bringing their friends to see what they've produced in the exhibition. This was a very extreme project that we did in the science area involving an artist and a scientist, which was an artist called Helen Piner working with a scientist called Mike Shattuck, who's a cardiac physiologist. And this was on the theme of oscillation. We did a big project and we reanimated hearts, pig hearts, not human hearts, in the science gallery. It was our first ever collaboration with the abattoir. And it involved taking pigs were being slaughtered for meat. And it was basically a heart transplant operation where the hearts were taken very rushed and brought into the gallery and then put into this amazing glassware structure. And then they were reanimated and they pumped blood for over 2 hours. And it was quite remarkable as an experience. And the funny thing was everyone saying, oh, that'd be terrifying for kids. The kids loved it. The parents were terrified. Another more kind of unusual project was where we did a project on synthetic biology and our relationship with bacteria. And as part of this, we had a community biolab in the science gallery where we had different artists and scientists in residence. And these are 2 of them. On the left is Christina Agapakis, who is a scientist from UCLA, and on the right is Sibyl Tolas, who is what she calls a smell provocateur and artist. And they created human cheese. So they took bacteria from famous people, and then they used that to create cheese. This is an example. This is the artist Olafur Eliasson, cheese made using bacteria from his tears. This was a project which got huge interest worldwide. And we had Hans-Ulrich Obrist's nose cheese. We had Belly Button from Michael Pollan, the American food writer. And nobody could eat anybody else's cheese. You could only eat your own cheese with the rule. You could smell other people's cheese. But this developed huge amount of interest. You know, even Fox News covered it, and suddenly you had Fox News discussing bacteria and science, and for us that was the ultimate kind of conquest. Just to conclude, I suppose the science gallery was very much an experiment, and a slightly risky and courageous experiment in Trinity, particularly for the former provost, John Hegarty, who really kind of, with the help of the Noctans and others, allowed this to happen. But there was an idea that if this works here, why not elsewhere? So what we're doing now is actually creating a global network of science galleries. We're setting up a science gallery in London with King's College London at the foot of the Shard in a fantastic location at London Bridge. We're setting one up in Bangalore in India with the Indian Institute of Science. And Bangalore, of course, being India's science city and also a technology city. A wonderful multidisciplinary place. We're setting one up in Melbourne with the University of Melbourne, and we plan 8 worldwide, and these will all be sharing ideas, content, and also sharing people through the network. And this has been enabled in part by a significant gift from Google to get this off the ground. So this is kind of a little idea that was born in Ireland that has now grown wings and is spreading, infecting internationally. And this just gives you a sense of some of the international touring projects. Right now there's exhibitions in Taiwan, in Barcelona, we've had tours to Moscow. So it's an ambitious project, but something which really required the university to take a risk and to believe in something and to give it a chance and to give it air and to allow it to emerge as something a little bit like a skunk works for the university, somewhere where the usual rules of the university don't apply and where researchers can connect with artists and new ideas can emerge. And so I'm hugely excited. I'll be watching with interest from Munich to see how the plans develop for the Joyce Centre here. And it's really interesting to think in the space of literature and how you can create something that's not just about showing the great literature, but a place which is inviting participation and interaction from the public. So great to be here. Thank you very much.